Okay, well, welcome back. Of course, everyone that's here, I've already welcomed you back. You know that I was ill for a while, and with my feet couldn't really go out. And of course, my darling daughter was born, and that's why we had to prolong the absence. But now we're back to work, and we're all good. And that's also if you're listening on the recording, I know there's a few people that don't attend that listen to the recording, and there's a good few people who are away right now for summer. So welcome to you also if you're listening on YouTube. So today we're going to continue where we left off from the last study. We were in chapter 6 of Proverbs at the end of verse 19. And what we're going to do today is, since the rest of chapter 6 talks about lust, and the whole of chapter 7 also talks about lust, we're going to finish off chapter 6, and at the same time we're going to go through the whole of chapter 7 as well. So if you thought we went fast through some parts of Proverbs by going through an entire chapter in one day, we're going to go extra fast today and go through this in one day as well, so 1.5 chapters. And the reason I want to do that is because I don't want to get too bogged down talking about the same stuff all the time, and we've already touched on lust a little bit, and so we don't need to go too deeply into that, but it is part of our succession going through the passages that are given to us in the chronological order, so it's important to deal with that as the scriptures give it. And there will be times where we'll have to really slow down where a new idea comes up in the later chapters of Proverbs, and so I'd rather slow down for things that are new and kind of bundle up things together that we've already seen, and go through those things a bit faster. And when it comes to the things that are new, like when we finally get to laziness or we get to bitterness or anger or something like that, to do a shorter study, or rather a longer study on a shorter passage. Does that make sense? Oh, here comes my bundle. Okay, so let's read that then. Proverbs 6, verse 20, and we're going all the way to the end of chapter 7. My son, keep your father's commandment, and forsake not your mother's teaching. Bind them on your heart always, tie them around your neck. When you walk, they will lead you. When you lie down, they will watch over you. And when you awake, they will talk with you. For the commandment is a lamp, and the teaching a light, and the reproofs of discipline are the way of life. To preserve you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress, do not desire her beauty in your heart, and do not let her capture you with her eyelashes. For the price of a prostitute is only a loaf of bread, but a married man hunts down a precious life. A married woman. Can a man carry fire next to his chest, and his clothes not be burned? Or can one walk on hot coals, and his feet not be scorched? So is he who goes into his neighbor's wife. None who touches her will go unpunished. People do not despise a thief if he steals, to satisfy his appetite when he is hungry. But if he is caught, he will pay sevenfold. He will give all the goods of his house. He will commit adultery. He who commits adultery lacks sense. He who does it destroys himself. Wounds and dishonor will he get, and his disgrace will not be wiped away. For jealousy makes a man furious, and he will not spare when he takes revenge. He will accept no compensation. He will refuse though you multiply gifts. Now chapter 7. My son, keep my words and treasure up my commandments with you. Keep my commandments and live. Keep my teaching as the apple of your eye. Bind them on your fingers. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call insight your intimate friend. To keep you from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words. For at the window of my house I have looked out through my lattice, and I have seen among the simple. I have perceived among the youths a young man lacking sense, passing along a street near her corner, taking the road to her house. In the twilight, in the evening, at the time of night and darkness, and behold, the woman meets him, dressed as a prostitute, wily of heart. She is loud and wayward. Her feet do not stay at home, now in the street, now in the market, and at every corner she lies in wait. She seizes him and kisses him, and with bold face she says to him, I had to offer sacrifices, and today I had paid my vows. So now I have come out to meet you, to seek you eagerly, and I have found you. I have spread my couch with coverings, colored linens from Egyptian linen. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes and cinnamon. Come, let us take our fill of love till morning. Let us delight ourselves with love. For my husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He took a bag of money with him. At full moon he will come home. With much seductive speech she persuades him. With her smooth talk she compels him. All at once he follows her, as an ox goes to the slaughter, or a stag is caught fast, till an arrow pierces its liver, and the bird rushes into a snare. He does not know that it will cost him his life. And now, O sons, listen to me, and be attentive to the words of my mouth. Let not your heart turn aside to her ways. Do not stray into her paths, for many a victim has she laid low, and all her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is the way to Sheol, going down to the chambers of death. Amen. So I know that just yesterday we had a sermon on the subject of lust. I don't know if anyone found that helpful. Personally, I thought he was too focused on sort of unpacking his passage and not really providing enough practical feedback for people who are struggling with those things. So what I really want to do is to give practical advice to this situation. That's what we're here for in Proverbs all the time, is to get practical advice on how to live our Christian lives. And we're not here to make deep studies on words or doctrines here. We're here to learn the practice of the Christian faith. I only apologize that we're talking about lust again, even though the sermon yesterday was on lust. That I couldn't do anything about that. That certainly wasn't my plan, but that's just how things go. But hopefully, if you found it helpful yesterday, hopefully this will also be helpful. And if you didn't find yesterday helpful at all, then hopefully this will supplement the technical teaching that you got yesterday and give you some practical teaching today. So today, as we've said, we're talking about lust and adultery. Solomon addresses the subject, and then he tells a story to exemplify his point. And basically what he's trying to drive home for us is that there are consequences for sin. And that's something we've seen throughout the whole of the book of Proverbs so far. It's what we'll continue to see. There are always consequences for our sins. Now, previously, this was directed towards married men, and now it's more directed towards single men. But since we're not all men in this room, I'll do my best to apply it to women as well. Well, whatever way it goes, it will apply to women anyway. So it's definitely not an issue that. So as we jump into this, Solomon gives us the typical introduction that we're quite familiar with in verses 20 to 23. My son, keep your father's commandment and forsake not your mother's teaching. Bind them on your heart always, tie them around your neck, and when you walk, they will lead you. When you lie down, they will watch over you, and when you awake, they will talk with you. For the commandment is a lamp, and the teaching a light, and the reproofs of discipline are the way of life. And so I don't think we need to really unpack that. That's very similar to a lot of stuff we've already seen. So jumping into verse 24, we see this reminder. This is to preserve you from the evil woman, from the smooth tongue of the adulteress. So this woman, this adulteress, this foreign lady, this evil woman, she's already shown up in Proverbs, and she will also show up again in the future. But now she's back, and this time she's got her smooth words with her. So we've already looked at words before, and so Solomon also adds beauty in verse 25. Do not desire her beauty in your heart, and do not let her capture you with her eyelashes. Lusting in the heart, I think that's the first thing that we should consider there. It's kind of your thoughts. Your heart is separate to your thoughts, but what you think is influenced by your heart. And so if you start having lustful thoughts towards someone, that's because something in your heart is in the wrong place, and it's just boiling to the surface through your thoughts, and then eventually it comes out in an action, or you start making steps towards making that action. But at the start, it starts off with that misinformed heart that says this is a good idea, taking this pleasurable advantage is a good idea, and then your mind starts to ruminate on it. Solomon's saying to cut that off right from the start. Don't dwell on that desire. And then he says something which to our culture is very weird. Do not let her capture you with her eyelashes. Does that sound weird to you guys? I remember watching cartoons as a kid, and I think it was Tom and Jerry even. I think Tom fell in love with a female cat, and she had those eyelashes. I think she would blink like really fast. Yeah. So it's not completely foreign to our culture, but the reason I think Solomon is saying this is because the eyes in Hebrew culture were regarded as the biggest source of beauty. That's what I've gathered from studying the ancient East. Just as an example of that, I think we talked about that a little bit in these studies. No? So basically, Jacob, if you recall, he fell in love with Rachel, who was beautiful, but he didn't like Leah so much. And it specifically says because she had weak eyes. So something about her eyes was unattractive to him, and that was like the source of beauty. That makes sense when we realize that they probably wore veils. And so the eyes were pretty much all the man could see. And so to say that she has beautiful eyes, don't be drawn in by those eyes, that begins to make sense. So if somebody does lust in their heart, then verse 26 tells us how it will go. For the price of a prostitute is only a loaf of bread, but a married woman hunts down a precious life. So basically what Solomon's telling us there is that going to prostitutes will cost financially, but it's not a big price financially, but it is a big price to pay morally. It is a big price to pay in terms of the consequences that we may have to face if we go and do that. But also there is the reality that committing an act of adultery in Israel will cost you your life if you're caught. In Israelite law, we can see that in Leviticus 20 verse 10, people who committed adultery were to be killed. That was a societal law of the time. Adultery was punishable by death. So if you wanted to go and commit adultery with someone, you were laying your life on the line, literally. You might think you could get away with it, but you were still taking a big, massive risk. And that's something that we don't really relate to so much in Romania because we don't have the death penalty for anything here, right? But imagine if you live in America and you commit a crime that's punishable by death, then you're a lot less likely to commit that crime if you're going to be punished by death than if you're going to be punished for, I don't know, jail or social time or whatever. So the idea is that it's serious spiritually, but it's also serious in the fact that you will lose your life if you get caught doing this. And then in verses 27 to 28, Solomon uses some play on words to illustrate his point. Can a man carry fire next to his chest and his clothes not be burned? Answer, obviously not. Or can one walk on hot coals and his feet not be scorched? Again, obviously not. It's rhetorical. It's so obvious what the answer is that it's proving a point through merely asking the questions. The idea being that if you play with fire, or your lust, then you are going to get burned. As we say in English, if you do stupid things, you get stupid prizes, right? So if you play with fire, you get burned. And in spiritual terms, if you enact on your lust, then you will get the consequences of enacting on your lust. As a practical warning for you guys, there was a preacher a number of years ago, and in 2018 he was discovered to have committed adultery. He was a wonderful preacher. He had a brilliant way of opening the text, very good, godly, faithful man, or at least he seemed to be godly. And he committed adultery, and he was fired from his position as a result. And I think that's really important for us to look at as young men, as young women. It's so easy for us to think we're on this high level, like we'll never get caught, we'll never give in to something bad. But then we look at this guy who had all this study, all this information in his head, and it wasn't impacting his heart. So the reason Solomon says earlier on that we need to not desire her beauty in our hearts, or his beauty in our hearts, is because the heart will mislead us. It will deceive us. And any one of us that thinks that we can conquer on our own and that we're strong enough to get by when those moments come, we can end up very easily like this preacher. And so we want to be spared from that. So as Solomon says in verse 29, so is he who goes into his neighbor's wife, none who touches her will go unpunished. But how people are punished remains to be seen. Before getting there, Solomon makes an interlude in verses 30 to 31. He says, people do not despise a thief if he steals, to satisfy his appetite when he is hungry. But if he is caught, he will pay sevenfold. He will give all the goods of his house. Now, that seems like a really weird interlude, right? It is talking about lust, and now suddenly we're talking about stealing. And it actually even seems to be trying to justify the thief. Like, he's hungry, he needs to get food. So, of course, it's right. But then in the next verse, he then shows that it's a bad thing because he's going to lose everything if he gets caught. He'll literally lose his whole house. So basically Solomon's comparing these adulterers to these thieves, and basically the reason he's doing it is because we often make these kinds of excuses ourselves. Oh, I need this release, so I'm going to go and do this thing. I'm going to go and type down that thing on that laptop and I'm going to get my release that way. Or, we have a friend who's quote unquote emotionally unstable and they're of the opposite sex and they say that they need us. You get that phone call at midnight saying, hey, I really need you to come over and help me and support me. And then you obviously have good intentions with doing that, but then you get tangled up into something. And it could end up becoming sexual. That's desiring the beauty in our hearts. That's the idea that Solomon's saying there, that we've not guarded ourselves, we've not been wise, we've not informed our minds enough by saying that release that we think we need is going to satisfy us, because it's not. So we need to inform our minds to remind ourselves that that's not going to satisfy us. Likewise with the friend at midnight. That's the sort of situation where we need to be wise. We need to tell ourselves, and we need to tell those people, look, we want to help you, but I cannot do that. Now I can recommend someone to help you, and if that will help you, that's the case, but I cannot put myself in that situation. Wisdom dictates what we have to do in that moment. So the consequences of storing these things in our hearts and not turning away are found in verses 32 and 33. He who commits adultery lacks sense, but he who does it destroys himself. Wounds and dishonors will he get, and his disgrace will not be wiped away. And basically, Solomon's just saying it's completely illogical. You'd throw away your entire life just for a few moments of pleasure. It bring your life into ruin because of it. You get caught, you end up with diseases, you lose money, you lose all these things, you lose your reputation. You're wounded if you give into this. You could end up with an STD. You could live with that shattering guilt for the rest of your life that, oh, I did this thing. Or that it brings dishonor when it's brought to light. But the harshest part from what we see here is that said person makes the spouse jealous, the spouse of the woman. You're inviting anger, bitterness, and decimation into your life when you take a married person and you act sexually towards them. And imagine it. It's not hard to imagine. Such a person will not be easy to appease. If you sleep with someone's wife or with their husband, that person's going to be angry with you. It's not going to be easy to make them happy. Which is what Solomon's talking about there in verse 35. He'll not accept any compensation. He will refuse though you make multiple gifts. So those are the material consequences with which we have to weigh in the balance. And in those heated moments of temptation where we feel like we can't control ourselves, we tend to only focus on the pleasure. We open that laptop, we start typing that thing in, and there's that little voice in the back of our heads that's saying, don't do that, you shouldn't do this, but we ignore it because the heat is just so hot and we don't feel like we can get ourselves away from it. Well, wisdom in that moment, it calls us to remember the consequences. So as you're typing on your computer to try and find that video or that picture that you want to look at, remind yourself, internet history is a thing. You can get caught. It's a bit of a crude expression, but you can get caught with your pants down. That's what we say in English. I think that's appropriate to this situation. There's incognito or whatever, but these things are all stored in a big massive database somewhere. These things can be used against you one day. The point that I'm trying to make is that there is always consequences. If you're not married and you do that sort of thing, you will have to confess that to your spouse one day, and they may not react very well to it. Hopefully not, but that's a possibility. If there was a guy who did that earlier on in his life, and then it was discovered later on when he was in a ministry position, and he lost everything because of that. There are consequences for falling into these things, and that's not to say that you're beyond redemption if you've done those things. It's not to say that you're necessarily going to face those consequences if you have done that in the past and repented of it, but that's just something that wisdom is calling us to remember. There are consequences for doing the wrong thing. And so when we weigh those consequences in the balance and we see that the consequences are possible diseases, getting caught, or blah, 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 the weight falls really heavy on that side. But then when we think just a little bit of pleasure on this side, the scales don't balance. The weight is always on the consequences. And so that's why you need to think about the weight is on that consequence. And one of my commentators, one of the commentaries I read, he said, I've never met somebody who was glad to commit adultery. Now, I have met people that were glad to commit adultery, but ultimately when someone's finally faced with the ruin that they brought into their house or someone else's house, I've never met someone who literally says, yes, this was a wonderful thing. They always hate it and they're always upset. Families are destroyed, diseases are contracted, money is wasted, unexpected pregnancies and shame, all sorts of things, all over some pleasure. So nobody should look at that and say it's worth it. They should all be looking at the scales and seeing how they're not in balance and seeing that the consequences were worse than the pleasure. So that's just an encouragement to remember. Next time you're in that burning moment of temptation, you will be burned of it if you don't douse the flames. And a good way to douse those flames is to remember the consequences and to weigh them in balance. Now, in case this teaching from Solomon in and of itself was not enough, Solomon then gives us a story. And because it's a story, we don't have to go into every minute detail of it. We can jump through that pretty quickly, and yeah, we're good. So he starts again with his foundation of wisdom in the first 5 verses here, chapter 7. My son, keep my words and treasure up my commandments with you. Keep my commandments and live. Keep my teaching as the apple of your eye. Bind them on your fingers, write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and call insight your intimate friend, to keep you from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words. So I think we don't need to go over those first 3 verses. That's very similar again to stuff that we've already seen. But verses 4 and 5 here, there's something that we should note, and that's that we're called to call wisdom our sister. Has anyone caught that before and thought it was weird to call wisdom our sister? Again, it's weird to our culture. We'd never consider calling something that we're supposed to love romantically our sister, but in Hebrew culture there was a kind of caveat for that linguistically. And just if you read the Song of Songs, chapter 5, verse 2, you see that Solomon calls this beautiful woman that he wants to marry, he calls her his sister, my sister, my bride. Completely weird to us. You hear the banjo playing in the background as you hear Sweet Home Alabama, but that's there is no idea of incest there. That's not what's going on there. It's just a cultural matter how they use a word. And so that's what Solomon is saying here. We need to marry ourselves to wisdom. Like, we have to make a commitment here. It's not those old police movies where a police officer would save a woman and she'd be head over heels for him and she'd be trying to make an advance on him and he'd say, I can't do this, I'm married to the job. That's what we need to be like. When lust comes to us and starts fighting us, we need to say, I'm married to wisdom, I'm not going to do this thing. So the idea is that we are to love and in this sense marry our lives to wisdom. When we remember that Christ is wisdom, then it becomes a lot more clear to us. That's 1 Corinthians 1:24 if you're taking notes. And we remember in Revelation 19 verses, I think 1 to 6 off the top of my head, or 6 to 10, something like that. Marriage is used to represent the relationship that we'll have in heaven with Christ, the church and Christ, the Lamb and his church and his bride. So again, that seems weird to us, but the idea is that we're just so intimately close to our Savior. And that's the same intimacy that we need to have with his wisdom. So whatever he would call us to do, we need to be so intimately familiar with it, to study it, to learn from it, to practice it, that it's just second nature to us. And so when lesser things like forbidden men or women would turn our attention from Christ, we must remember that we have made a commitment already to wisdom. We weigh in the balance all those consequences, but above all, we put Christ on top of those consequences and say, that's the worst thing, that I dishonor Christ if I give in to this. So yes, there are all those material consequences, but the worst consequence is that I bring dishonor to my Savior through this. So marriage to wisdom is the way to avoid becoming like this upcoming young man whom Solomon introduces in verses 6 to 9. For at the window of my house I have looked out through my lattice, and I have seen among the simple, I have perceived among the youths, a young man lacking sense, passing along the street near her corner, taking the road to her house in the twilight, in the evening, at the time of night and darkness. So this young man here is being portrayed as foolish. It seems that he's with a group of guys that are just hanging out at night. Didn't really do that much in the UK, but here in Romania I know kids tend to, stay out on the streets at midnight and shout and annoy all their neighbors. So I guess that's the kind of thing that Solomon's looking out of his window and seeing a group of kids, or maybe young men, teenagers, and they're just hanging out aimlessly, not really with a point. And one of them's going to go home, and he's going to take the short way home because it's easier, and that was a bad idea. So basically, one commentator, scholar, he wrote, this young man, he wonders where time and place work against him. So we say that sometimes it's good to be in a place, but not at the wrong time, or it's good to be doing something at a certain time, but this isn't the right place for it. In this case, this isn't the right time or the right place. Dark at night, when everyone's tired, susceptible to this sin, and he's in a place that he surely knows is not a good place for him to be. And what happens when he draws near this woman's home? Well, we read in verses 10 to 12. And behold, the woman meets him, dressed as a prostitute, wily of heart. She is loud and wayward. Her feet do not stay at home. Now in the street, now in the market, and at every corner she lies in wait. Now, just a little thing that I realized there, I didn't prepare it, but notice that she's in the market there. She's in the street, she's in the market. Remember previously, Solomon said that wisdom was in the market, crying aloud, listen to me. He was on the wall, she was in the streets. I think, just thinking off the top of my head here, I think Solomon's drawing a parallel to his previous lesson. He's saying, look, this is wisdom over here, and sin is trying to do the opposite. It's trying to do the same thing, and you've got to choose which side you're going to go to. You're going to choose the wisdom street, or you're going to choose the non-wisdom street. So she's dressed provocably and has been waiting to ambush him. We learn that in verse 13, she seizes him and kisses him. With a bold face, she says to him, and verse 14, she says to him, I had to offer sacrifices, and today I've paid my vows. So she doesn't give him a chance. She just grabs him and kisses him. Now, if anyone were in that situation, you're immediately in a very difficult situation to get out of. That is something that very few people would be able to resist, I think. So what she's done is she knows this. She knows that if she just grabs him, is very firm with her desires with him, and puts the idea in his head in a very provocative way, then he's not going to be able to resist her. She can trap him, and it works. So what we realize is he should have run away. As soon as he saw her on the street corner or outside her house, he should have run away, like Joseph did with Potiphar's wife. But he didn't, and she's clever. And she probably knew Joseph's story as well. If she was in Israel, she probably knew that story and knew how to react, rather than making advances and whining at the guy to just grab him and go for it. That's what Potiphar's wife didn't do. So what we should ask ourselves at this point is it too late for this young man? What do you think? Too late? No. He's actually not done as far as this specific situation is. He's not actually done anything wrong yet. She grabbed him, she kissed him. He's not, as far as the narrative tells us, done anything wrong yet. However, he is in a situation where it's going to be very hard for him to get away from. And she's made it deliberately very hard. And for us in real time, it's the same. If we're on the laptop, like I said earlier, if we're on the laptop, we've typed down what we want to see, or we've found ourselves in that situation with that co-worker where we're alone and we know no one's coming to the room for a long time. The moment you're fixated in that situation, it's like a gravity, like you can't escape from it. That's how it feels, but in reality we can get away from it. We can remind ourselves of what will happen if we give into this. It's just very hard. And that's why we need Christ, because if we just think about the consequences, then we're just changing our moral attitude in this matter. But if we remind ourselves we're representing Christ in this, we're dishonoring Christ if we fail, then it suddenly becomes a spiritual matter. And we will still fail when it's just about thinking about Christ, but it will be a lot easier when we're so infused with love for Christ to resist these things. So the more we love Christ, the more we study his word, the more we will just want to be out of that situation. And that's how to get out of the gravity trap of this black hole of adultery. Now, what she says in verse 14 is just startling. If you imagine you were an Israelite in the time to hear this, she has offered sacrifices and paid her vows already. So she said, I've already made atonement for what we're going to do tonight, so it's okay, we can do it because we're going to be forgiven anyway. Well, that's so often what we say when we're faced with that situation, or we see that thing that tempts us to lust. We say, I don't think I should do this, but I know that Christ has died for me, and I am a Christian, and I do believe, and I know that Christ will forgive me if I give into this sin. And you've all been there. I know you've all been there, because that's the normal Christian life, and I've certainly been there myself. The reality is, though, that as Paul says in Romans 6, shall we continue to sin so that grace may abound? Absolutely not. No. In fact, we actually show grace abounds more if we resist our sin. because we show how God is helping us out of that pit of depravity that we've got ourselves into. And only by his grace can we resist these things. So if we show resilience to sin, resilience to temptation, and we run away from temptation, then we're actually magnifying God's grace and his glory much more if we get away from that than if we fall and ask for forgiveness. And so if your desire, your overall chief desire in this life is to glorify God, then think about that. God's grace abounds all the more if you resist this. God's glory abounds all the more if you resist this. So the more we focus ourselves and desire to glorify God with our lives, the more it's going to be easier to get away from those situations. And so, we cannot say, oh, Christ, just I'm forgiven, I'm going to heaven anyway, so therefore we can just sin as much as we want. We absolutely cannot. So her final words are convincing in verses 15 to 17. So now I have come out to meet you, to seek you eagerly, and I have found you. I have spread my couch with coverings, coloured linens from Egypt. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. So everything's nice, everything's arousing. And then in verse 18, come, let us take our fill of love till morning. Let us delight ourselves with love. Abby has a prophecy for us. So the thing here is that she has the nerve to call it love. Has that ever come across your attention before? Let us take our fill of love. This is not love. But when someone's in an adultery situation, they're upset with their spouse and they sleep with a co-worker or something like that, they call it love because, I'm not getting the affection I need at home. But that's such a daring thing to say, to call this love, when God has made specific and made clear what love actually is, to go away from that and say, no, this other thing is love. It's just absolute nerves on our part if we dare to say that. And then finally in verses 19 to 20, for my husband is not at home, he has gone on a long journey. He took a bag of money with him. At full moon he will come. Now, if we remember the end of chapter 6, we saw that the man who was married to this woman, assuming it's the same woman, but in the case, we'll just assume that, he caught the guy and he was angry with him. So you see what Solomon's trying to do here now. He's trying to show, well, once you resolve that, okay, I'm not going to do this because I'll have an angry husband or wife on my case. In this case, there is no opportunity to get caught because the husband's on a long journey. So you see what Solomon's doing? He's trying to throw different scenarios from different angles so that we can cover a wider base. So she's saying you won't get caught. It's our little secret, and sin often says that you'll turn on incognito mode. You'll not get caught, or there's no cameras here, or no one has any way to find out unless one of us tells them. But we'd be surprised. People find out things in amazing ways. So that's something worth keeping in mind. So what happens? Verses 21 to 23 tell us, with much seductive speech she persuades him. With her smooth talk she compels him. All at once he follows her, as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a stag is caught fast, till an arrow pierces its liver, and a bird rushes into a snare. He does not know that it will cost him his life. So this young man, he gives in, he is snared, so like, of course, in a trap, kapkanat. Kapkanat, yeah. And he's going to face the consequences that we saw above. Now, note here how desperate both of them are in this situation to sin, because they both know the consequences if they fail. And if they fail, they know the consequences if they get caught. But they don't care. They're so heated that they're willing to put their lives on the line for this. So Solomon warns in verses 24 to 27, and now, O sons, listen to me, and be attentive to the words of my mouth. Let not your heart turn away to her ways. Do not stray into her paths. For many a victim has she laid low, and all her slain and a mighty throng. Her house is the way to Sheol, going down to the chambers of death. So again, for our societal context, it kind of seems weird to talk about going down to death as a result of adultery. But when we remember the Israeli context, that they would be killed for being caught, then we realize, yes, actually, this sin can lead to death. And it can lead to death in our society as well, just in a different way. STDs, some of them can be very lethal, and they can totally eat away at someone's life until they die. So even in our society, that still applies. And so even if we'll not be killed today for any sin that we commit today, it is like we're slain. If you open the door to sin, more sin is able to come in. It's like If that door's closed and someone's trying to get in, and I open the door a little bit, then they can get their foot in the door, and once their foot's in the door, they can force more of the door open, right? That's what sin does in our lives. It forces its way through. It sneaks into a little crack, and then once it's in that crack, it cracks it wide open. There will be, with our lives, we will pay for allowing such sin in. So all of this can be avoided. And so many people say, oh, if you just get married one day, you find that perfect spouse and you get married and you have the perfect place for release of sexual tension and then you'll be free from this. Not true at all. It helps. I won't lie there. It does help. But it is not true that resolves all your problems. What will resolve your problems is if you marry yourselves to wisdom. If you remind yourselves of the covenant that you have made with Christ and that he is the one you want to honor above all. So if we keep Christ in our sight, he will be more beautiful to us than any sin. So be prepared with foresight that temptation will come. Be reminded that when temptation is there, that there are consequences for our sins. And look back to the cross where Jesus Christ died to free us from this, to give us something better. Now, just a final note for anyone who maybe recently has failed in this or continually had a struggle of failing in this, or even leaves this room today and fails, or in the next week or month, or even within the next year has a struggle or fails. Let me ask again, is it too late for you? And of course the answer is no, it is absolutely not too late for you. It's not an excuse to sin, as we saw, but that's what the gospel's for. The gospel is there to remind us that we are not perfect, that we need a perfect Savior to be perfect, because we are not. We cannot uphold God's law on our own. And so if you have failed, if you will fail, remember the gospel. You're not irredeemable. By grace, you can ask for forgiveness. And by grace, you can stand tall again. And if there's anyone that does directly struggle with this, we're very happy to do counseling. We're happy to meet and talk about it or provide help, whatever resources, books. But you just have to ask, and don't be ashamed to ask. There's no judgment from any of us on that side. But we want to help one another, and if the Lord allows us to do that in some small way, then it will be our joy. Amen.